So my goal is to become a therapist, and I've dealt with my own mental health things. We're very open on this podcast about mental health, and we always try to incorporate it into all our guests. And we've had a few therapists on now, which have been really good because a lot of people listen to them and get a lot of value out of them, a lot of tips on how to, deal with their mental health. And I think this is like with, just the things that you've been through, and it just needs to be talked about more, man. I think it's going towards the direction that it is being pushed more, and it's becoming more mainstream to talk about, but I still don't think it's there. And honestly, man, like, I just want you to, take the stage and like talk about your mental health journey from the start, and when it really began, the things that may have happened, and obviously things that you're comfortable with talking about, man. And that's the biggest thing. That's the biggest worry I had before you came in.
That's how I think it should be. Like, I mean, I guess I can preface this with something I've learned, and I'm very lucky to have mostly been, since the film came out, it's helped me sort of release shame or stigma or feeling like I'm wrong or whatever, because the way it's been received by people and my friends in my community, like, has been positive, right? And a big thing I've learned just over the last little while is, even in like something like Alcoholics Anonymous, where they have this anonymous portion to it, because I understand the sentiment in that, and that program started a long time ago. And so, like almost 100 years ago. And so it was important for people to be anonymous with what they struggled with. Mm. But we all struggle.
Right.
If you exist in a body and you have a brain, like, you are experiencing some level of suffering. Doesn't matter who you are. And that level is individual to us. And it's not meant to be compared, I don't think. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, if you're alive, like, there's some real
suffering,
shit that you're going through. And to not, how do I phrase this? For me personally, it's like, the more I keep that in, the more it seems like it's not allowed, right? And I think it should be allowed for every human being to have problems. Mm-hmm. And the way we get through those is by first realizing that, like, we don't have problems because we're
bound
characteristically, defected or something like that. It's because we're human.
We're human. It's inevitable that we're gonna suffer. And there was a scene in the documentary where the clinical counselor was talking about the existential crisis, the feeling of, life. You got to just accept that life is suffering, and then
has suffering. Yeah, that's how I like to say it. It has it. It also has joy, and it has,
bliss,
mystery,
happiness, mystery, love,
and suffering, and they're all very valid. They all play their role. Life has pain. And usually when we experience joy, we're not thinking there's something wrong here. But when we experience pain, it feels like that pain is wrong, or that we've done something wrong to be receiving that pain, right? Or if there's a problem, it means there's something wrong. And I only speak personally because I understand there's a level of pain that people exist in that they, quote unquote, shouldn't have to endure, so I'm not trying to say, like, but I try to look at my own pain and my own challenges not as something that's not as something that's present because there's something wrong. It's because that's a part of life. And I don't mean to paint that with a sort of a sparkly brush either. Like, it's hard, man. It's hard when you're going through pain, when you're going through loss, when you're going through confusion. But it's there as much as everything else is.
In simple terms, I mean, as simple as it can be, is there's all the good and then there has to be the bad. There has to be. There's literally no way where it can just be just happiness, joy, pleasure, love.
Yeah.
There's...
Well, and I think, love is an interesting one. I love love. And for me, I've learned a lot about it over the last little while. And I don't look at love as just an affectionate feeling towards something pleasant anymore. Like, it's a real big capacity to sort of hold space and endure all those hard things we just talked about. And learning about love, it takes those hard things. I mean, I feel like I've learned to love myself in a way over the last couple years that isn't perfect, but is quite solid and special. But what it took to learn that wasn't climbing a mountain and having a great day and being at the top of my game. It was going through relapse after relapse and not having any sleep for 4 days and pacing around in my apartment alone after smoking crack for 3 days and being like, oh God, this is, and, having to walk myself through come down after come down alone and not do the thing that I would normally do in that time, which is you're a failure, why can't you stop doing drugs, blah, 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 all the self-judgment and the criticism that one would get in that state. I had to kind of like really learn the practice of holding my hand through it and being like, this is horrible, Harvey, but like, you're here, you're going to be okay. It's like loving something is easy when it's lovable. Loving yourself is easy when you're, for me personally, when I'm a certain weight, when I'm on top of a mountain, when I'm singing on stage, when I'm doing cool things. I'm like, yeah, I love myself. Of course I do.
Everything's great, yeah.
But like, do you love yourself when you really need to, or when you're being asked of it? And pain, fear, loneliness, loss, I think what those things are asking of us is our love. Pain shows up so that it can be loved. Fear shows up so that you can kind of hold it and take care of it. And that's the power of this special thing that we call love, is it has the capacity to do that. Because fear doesn't scare love. Pain doesn't make it want to run away, right? So there is this quality that we have to be able to hold the space and bring in those really difficult, inevitable realities of life with this other quality. And to have joy doesn't mean to have the absence of difficulty or of the opposite of joy, of anger. Like, right. My happiness doesn't depend on my unhappiness being absent for it to exist. They kind of need to be together, right?
Together. I'm wondering, when you mentioned that you found true love and the true love for yourself after relapse after relapse after relapse, and going through the tough times and going through all of that, I guess to really break it down, I mean, there might not be really a way that you can explain it, but what was the thinking process and the process to get to the place where you began loving yourself? Like, what was the moment? Like, was there a certain phrase you kept telling yourself? Was there a certain mind, like a paradigm switch you had within yourself that began that journey of loving yourself? If that makes sense.
Yeah. I think starting recovery circles and stuff like that at an early age was what kind of initially started it. And then I was sober for about 4 years between 2015 and 2019. And during that time, I got to experience some plant medicine stuff that really opened me up spiritually. I got into Buddhism and Hinduism and meditation and mindfulness, and listened to a lot of podcasts and books by these really teachers. And a lot of those teachings kind of center around this quality of love and tolerance, you know. And so that was kind of what opened it up. But then what really made it urgent was a suicide attempt. I mean, I really got close to dying, and I don't know, like my life actually I wanted to kill myself because I felt alone and so powerless over this addiction and worthless. I mean, and this happened right after we finished wrapping the film. It was like I had the best summer of my life. I was in the best shape of my life, blah, blah, blah. All those things you could measure of sort of, hey, I'm doing good. I had all that. And then, you know, the winter came, the climbing season ended. I couldn't dedicate myself to the thing anymore. There was still some residual, basically, isolation from COVID and from friends I've lost and a girlfriend. And yeah, I was in a dark place and, you know, took myself to the very edge of ending my life. And I was rescued by a stranger. And I broke down in his arms and, you know, cried. And anyway, that was that was in November of 2020. And so I don't know if I necessarily like said, okay, I'm going to love myself now per se, but I had to, because the other option, you know, was dying. And so I at some point, maybe I just decided, like, I'm not going to do this to myself anymore. I'm not, no matter what happens or how bad my life is or how many mistakes I make, I'm not going to beat myself up more about it. And of course, I mean, like, I make mistakes and I'm like, oh, you idiot. You know, like I haven't crossed the finish line of self-love. The cool thing about it is it's like, it's not a point that you reach where you're like, okay, reached it, figured it out.
It's everyday practice.
It's everyday practice. Yeah. And the problems and the challenges and the loss and the grief and all of those things that we get, I think are there for me to get even better at loving them. You know, the world doesn't give me problems so that I can become a good problem solver. Like, what benefit does the world have by me not having any problems? It's great for me. I think what the world needs of me and what my problems ask of me are not how to solve them, but how to be kind, because the world needs kindness more than Harvey being problem-free.
Right. Watching the documentary, a couple of scenes where you were in the middle of a climb and you just began, you know, yelling, I fucking love being alive. I'm so happy I'm alive. And
yeah,
it's just, I guess, would, you know, after the close encounter of dying, was it a switch where, you know, you thought about those moments while you were climbing and thought to yourself, I have experienced happiness. I have been through pure bliss and I loved that and I want to experience that again.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because after the attempt, my life actually didn't get better or easier. My addiction got worse. Everything got worse and actually like escalated a lot. But what's interesting was my tolerance for myself actually increased a lot. And that sort of willingness or that, yeah, tolerance is a good word. I think sometimes we think of tolerance as sort of like, oh, I'm tolerating this. But to tolerate something in a loving way is, I think, a really beautiful thing. And again, being a human, there's a lot you got to tolerate. But being able to tolerate with some kindness is so special. And so even though my life went way worse, there was something about this. Yeah, my ability to sort of walk through it with, not with a smile on my face, but with some true, gentle kindness towards it has been where I'm at. And that's been the practice. But yeah, I mean, to answer your question, I just want to keep experiencing what life is going to bring, regardless of what it brings me. I mean, I'm not going to lie and say like, yeah, sure, I'll just take it on. Like, of course, I want to experience joy more than I want to experience.
Of course, yeah.
But I kind of know that my joy isn't dependent on things being good anymore. It is hinged on it, as you know, it would be. But I mean, for instance, I went to rehab. I've been 3 times in 3 years, and twice have been in the last 6 months. And I'm currently finishing a program right now. And so I went to treatment in August of 2022 to November, and had a really incredible time there. Again, like, came out of that place fit, happy, spiritually, mentally, in a good, soaring, and immediately relapsed again, and took myself back 3 months later. And, on the surface level, or someone going through that, and even me myself for a little bit, was kind of looking at it like, man, you fucked up. Like, you were sober, you just left treatment, then you relapsed again. Now you got to give up your apartment, you got to give up your job, you got to go to Surrey to a treatment center. Like, what the fuck, dude? But like, me going back has been great. And like, checking yourself into rehab for a 5th time, that's not a mistake. That's a sign of the love that you bear for yourself. It's a beautiful thing to be able to go, hey, I'm doing this again.
Right. Just even the fact of telling yourself, putting yourself back into rehab is something to be very proud of. But before it was kind of like, what the fuck, man? Like, I just went through this, now I have to go to rehab. So it was like a perpetual cycle of just, talking down on yourself.
Exactly.
Getting yourself more anxious and more depressed. Why? I thought I got through the rehab. I thought I was past that. I was past that in my life. I put that behind me, but now I'm back.
Exactly.
So would you say that is your mindset with everything now, no matter what happens in my life, no matter where I go, the external things happening around me? It's almost as if I'm not expecting it, but I'm okay with it. I'm just okay with it being. I'm just okay with, my friend being an asshole to me. It's okay. Like,
yeah. Yeah. I mean, even if I'm not okay with it, I think it still is asking me or trying to teach me about kindness. And I say kindness and switch for love, And if you have that, you can still be not okay with something, and something can be unpleasant, but at least you have that other component too, rather than more anger, more resentment, more judgment, more aversion, more resistance. I mean, when you offer resistance to something, it just creates more resistance. When you offer kindness, tolerance, that's not saying, it's not being a doormat either. Like, you can have boundaries with kindness. You can, just better decisions come out of that, and a better state of being. And it's not about just like, oh, everything's okay. And I know that's not what you were saying, but so, yeah, I mean, my mission, or the way I try to approach things is from that place. And it includes with other people too, right? Like, I think I've gotten better at, interacting with people through hard stuff, because I've had to interact with myself through it, right? Like, things aren't always going to be pretty, right? And it's at that moment where things need the most softness than the sort of, we've learned, I'm saying a lot of we statements, so I hope that's okay out there. If it's not personal to you, it's all good. But, we've learned somehow that the energy of, let's just say anger, for lack of a better word, but that can cover a lot of different things, that's going to motivate change or a result like better or faster than, say, gentleness or kindness or patience or not doing anything, right? It's like, and especially towards the self. Well, if I want to lose weight and I can boot myself into shape by like cutting all this out and telling myself, get the fuck in the gym, asshole, right? Like this sort of, but we think if we're just kind of easier, then like we won't get a result, or people will hurt us. People will disrespect us because we're too gentle, or, and I just think that's a misnomer.
One thing I'm really hearing is that it seems, and correct me if I'm wrong, I have no, I could be completely wrong, obviously, but do you think a big part of your journey and your journey with mental health has been, a form of judgment to yourself when things are like, that's the fundamental thing going on every time you do fall into, dark waters? Is it, for example, like as a kid growing up and, going through, your teenage years, and you mentioned in the documentary you started drinking at a really young, like 12, 13. I guess even before that, were there things like, because for me personally, I remember as a kid, man, like I remember being 8, 9, 10 and having moments of just complete disorientation in what's going on. And I knew that this wasn't what a 10-year-old kid should be feeling. I shouldn't be fearing irrational things. I should be anxious about my math homework. I should be anxious about my soccer game on a Saturday morning, not over things that shouldn't be an issue for a 10-year-old.
Right.
I guess I kind of want to bring it back to that time. Were there things that were going on within you that didn't make sense? And obviously as a kid, it's hard to voice these things, and you really don't understand what's going on, but were you aware that something was off? Something was going on, or was there?
Yeah, my memory from childhood has been that I was a relatively happy kid. Yeah, I do want to touch on, before I get into that, I do want to touch on something you said, this feeling of like, I should be thinking this instead of this. That's a really good point, because I think usually in most cases, and especially most cases with me, that's when I've suffered the most, is when I felt I should be this and not this, or this should be happening instead of this happening. We don't know why things happen, and So I remember being pretty happy, pretty supported. There's trauma for sure, but yeah, I was supported by my parents, and I like to play. I don't remember ever really feeling like something was off. When I started using, it was because I wanted to have a good time. I didn't necessarily want to escape something. There wasn't, and even up to now, there wasn't like sort of this darkness that I was like, I need to get out of this. It was more of like a wanting to just like bring it up a notch from where it's already good. I'm a person that likes joy, likes to celebrate, wants to squeeze the juice out of life. Like the thing that makes me want to smoke crack is the same thing that makes me want to rock climb. It's awesome. Feels great. I want to feel good. It's interesting that some of our sort of, if you can call it, most negative qualities are also the source of the best ones. Like the thing that makes me a live in the moment kind of guy. That's fun to be around and
enthusiastic, full of light energy.
That's the same thing that brings me towards
immaculate.
A darker thing with drugs.
Right.
And so, I started DJing at a young age. I liked parties, and all of this was just to sort of have this big experience of joy or of fun. My parents were a little bit boring, I guess, how I would call it when I was a kid. They didn't drink or just socialize too much. I started watching MTV at a really young age, and so I really remember. I do have this one memory of me being like seeing sort of the rock star life and being like, that's how I want to live. Like I basically decided at a young age that I was going to have the most fun in life that you possibly could.
Right.
And that's what I tried to do.
It's interesting though, man. It's really fascinating that you're saying that, because typically it would be, like you said, an escape from hardship and depression and anxiety. And you mentioned that you had trauma, like escaping from that, but it wasn't that. It was, you already felt good, but you wanted to take it up a notch. Mm-hmm. That's so interesting to me. I guess, was the good feeling that you had when you weren't, taking drugs, was it not enough, or you were just striving for more?
I think I was just striving for more. It's really hard to remember, but I think definitely because of, my parents, I saw them fight a lot when I was young, and there was never any sort of like physical abuse, but like some pretty crazy screaming matches and stuff like that I would witness as a kid. And that's scary for like a 6-year-old to watch. 100%. There was some sexual abuse from someone outside of the family. So there were things that happened at a very young age that I definitely couldn't process with the brain I had at the time. And so I think knowing what I've learned about addiction and stemming from trauma, there was definitely that there, even though I felt probably pretty good cognitively as a 10-year-old or whatever. I think there was probably some still stuff down there that was unprocessed.
Even right? Physically, like your nervous system was activated multiple times, and you were able to suppress it a little bit.
Yeah.
But like you said, like cognitively, you thought everything was fine, but your physiological self was still, triggered. And it's, I don't know, it's pretty cool to see that being on this mental health journey and going through addiction, and you're very you're very self-aware and mentally strong. Like, I mean, with this, what you told me as a kid, and having those traumas, the yelling matches, and the sexual abuse, even after all that, you're still sitting here telling me that you had a good childhood.
Yeah
Which is so like it's amazing.
Yeah.
Right? And we had, to add to that, we had a therapist on earlier for one of the episodes, Allie Gold. She was saying that trauma doesn't have to be this big thing where it's, you see your best friend get shot in front of you, or it could be anything, where trauma just really means when your nervous system gets activated and you start feeling, a little bit anxious and a little bit on your toes. That's trauma. That's a little trauma.
Yeah.
Right? So
it's what it does to you, not what the event was or the content of the event.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, hearing yourself say that after all those, after the things that you told me, the traumas that you've been through, and to even after all that say that you were a relatively happy child. I mean, what do you think of that? I mean, it's just really... I
think I was lucky. I think I have, the Harviness of me. I think I also had the support of like parents that did the best they could, that did a pretty darn good job despite their, weaknesses. I don't know, like it's
I just want to jump in, Harvey, because one of the things that I find fascinating, and one of the things I wanted to talk to you about, was because there's a lot that we don't know about the human brain. Like scientists are still figuring out how a lot of this stuff works.
Yeah.
Right. And I always wonder, I know for me, I was never diagnosed officially with ADHD, but I always feel like ever since I was a kid, I always struggled with focus. I'm the kind of person that a lot of things don't interest me. Like you could not get me to be interested in a lot of things, especially back in school. But if there was one thing I was interested in, I would absolutely hyper focus on that.
Yeah.
Now, sometimes that's a good thing.
Yeah.
But what happens is a lot of things fall by the wayside. And that can be bad in certain circumstances. And I wanted to talk to you a little bit about that because, a lot of people say some people just have addictive personalities and we don't know why. Or do we? I don't know what you think about that.
I think addiction is one of the most human qualities there is that runs through all of us. I think traditionally we think of addiction as alcohol, gambling, work, sex. Those are the big players because those are things that are super pleasurable and offer a humongous reward to the human brain, which is regulated by dopamine. Everything you've ever learned how to do in your life and do and don't do has been learned by your brain by how it regulates dopamine. Highly rewarding activities become more addictive because there's more dopamine reward in them. But everybody, I think, you can tell me out there if I'm wrong, but I think everybody has experienced some form of addiction in their lives. Maybe not permanently as a lifelong thing, but I feel like at some point, or if we haven't yet, we will at some point experience, having a habit that we know we shouldn't do, that we want to stop doing, but that we can't quite stop doing despite its negative consequences it's having on us. So, I think addiction is part of our nature in a way. I'm not saying that it's a positive thing, but it's something that we can look at as a human quality and not stigmatize so much. And it's also something that can be an incredible teacher to us. It has been for me. I don't know if I would be the person I am today without the stuff I've had to go through with addiction. I mean, I wouldn't.
Right.
Yeah.
It helped develop my compassion. It helped develop my all kinds of other skills. And
probably all the more important to also find something to channel that addiction into that in a positive way.
Yeah.
Like in your perfect example here of rock climbing, right? It has been super beneficial to you, also to your own mental health and your development as a person. And I'm sure it seems like it's made you an even more introspective person. I don't know if you were always that way or if that's something that you developed over time through channeling, like just rock climbing, being out in nature and the clear benefits of that whole experience.
Yeah, little AB for sure. So yeah, the addictive personality, it's like, well, if you have a brain, then you got it.
Mm.
I also understand what you're saying. Like there's some people that seem to be periled with sort of this thing and some that aren't. But the interesting is it doesn't come down to, you could take two people. One of them grew up with all the bad shit you could think about, and one of them grew up in sort of your picture perfect good family or whatever. One of them becomes an addict. One of them becomes the something president. Or you can take it vice versa. Someone grows up, great family, all education, all this stuff. They become an addict, and the one that had the trauma, they become so there's no sort of like recipe for it to happen. I think it just comes down to like environment and being human and the set of cards you're dealt, right?
Mm. I mean, I wouldn't even say addiction, but it's like passion, maybe. A bit of, fire or because like you said, I don't like the word addiction, man. I don't think it doesn't make.
It does have a stigma attached to it.
It does have a
sure.
stigma.
And there's the disease model, which I understand the sentiment of also. We've sort of decided to classify it as a disease so that people with addiction can be not looked at as criminals, basically, or bad people or whatever. They have a disease. So I think that's a good thing. And again, this is kind of obviously my own opinion and sort of personal experience with it. When you look at an organ that has a disease, liver or heart, there's something that's not working with it, right? Therefore, we would call it a disease. With the brain and addiction, I said it earlier, the way that we learn all our behaviors is through reward systems, which are regulated by dopamine. And when you smoke crack, you get a really big dopamine reward. In fact, an addictions counselor told me that it is 11 times the amount of the reward you could normally get from, say, doing something natural, skydiving, making love, anything pleasurable, exciting. Your body can up the dopamine by 2 times. When you do amphetamines or coke or these 11 times, he's like, there's nothing on planet Earth that can, or in the universe that we know of, that can spike your dopamine by that much. So kind of a long ramble there, but obviously huge reward for the brain.
Oh yeah.
Huge. Mm-hmm. And so the fact that I'm addicted to it and I keep going back to it to get this reward is not necessarily, doesn't really fit into the disease model, because the brain is actually working how the brain was intended to work in that case. The brain is intended to seek things that give it a dopamine reward. That's how it learns. Obviously, it wasn't intended to have crack cocaine in the mix of all the things that it would get rewarded from. So it's
like,
I guess what
you explaining that to, you know, an alien that just came from outer space, and you tell them that the alien would say, why wouldn't you do crack?
Exactly. That's the funny thing about it, is like, it's not, I'm sorry, maybe not funny, but yeah, it's obvious why it's addictive. It makes perfect sense why it's addictive. It makes perfect sense why, even though socially it was destroying my life, physically, all of these other things, that ancient part of your brain that's regulated by that, social consequences and shame, and you're not being able to pay your bills, that stuff comes way secondary to the first, right? So even though it was destroying my life, it was like, at this carnal level, something my brain wanted to keep me doing. Very hard to kind of stop.
So
Yeah.
if we know that, what are some of the precautions we can take to, I guess, if we are going to be addicted to something, what do we do to get addicted to the right thing? To the thing that actually helps improve us as human beings?
So I do describe addiction as, like, people have been like, so are you addicted to climbing? No, you know, and I get that sentiment, but I do still think addiction is, you know, it's more to do with repeating a behavior and not being able to stop doing it despite it having negative consequences. If you're doing a behavior and it's having a good effect on your life, I wouldn't necessarily even if you're doing it excessively, I wouldn't really call it addiction.
Right.
Anything can be an addiction. Like if you're skipping out on your family and your kids' soccer game so that you can play golf, and it's having an effect on your finances and your relationship with your partner, like maybe golf's an addiction, right? But if golfing's not causing problems in your life, it's fine. So how do we get addicted to the right things? It's like, or how do we do the right things? I mean, it's a hard one, right?
And there are varying degrees of severity too. That's the thing.
Yeah.
You know, the thing that I struggle with, I'm hesitant to even say this, but I wouldn't say I classify myself as having a porn addiction. Looking up the definition of it, it would have to be, like you said, something that's so debilitating that it's impacting your life. It's impacting your significant other, your family. Like you're so single focused on that, and everything else starts to, like, priority wise, starts to drop off quite a bit. But I do recognize, and it doesn't get talked about that often, about how addictive it is. And I've tried where to, okay, I'm going to go just take this one day. Let's see if I can go 1 week.
Mm-hmm.
And I get to the third day and this is all I'm thinking about.
Yeah.
And it's that dopamine rush because I know if I click that button, it feels really good.
Yeah.
And it's just so hard to stop.
Yeah.
And we're not actually really talking about that because I know for a fact, going back to conversations we've had in the past, Mo, with other previous guests about, does it affect relationships, especially an underdeveloped male mind? When you're a teenager, we know developmentally, your brain really isn't fully formed until you're about 25. You can't assess risk properly. Yeah. You're making bad decisions, right? And how does that affect you? How does that affect how you look at other people? Do you even know how to have a real relationship?
Yeah, I think you're right. And yeah, the level, right? Like obviously, yeah, you're not experiencing those huge negative consequences, but there's probably a bit that's like, yeah, maybe my connection to my sexuality is like getting a little bit fucked up here from watching this every day. Or, I mean, I didn't mean to just put words in your mouth, but there's a little part that's like, and just the fact that it's hard to go more than a few days without it is kind of like, So I think the first thing is like, that's okay. And I think looking at, well, first it's like amazing that you can see that and want to maybe examine it and try to change it. So like, even if it doesn't change, even if you don't meet your week of sobriety, you know, I think just seeing that there's something there is good. Like this.
And you said something really important that I want to stress is about being kind to yourself too, because we are so hard on ourselves. And that to me is, I think, one thing that is,
it doesn't
work and it's damaging.
Yes.
Right? Because you get into this cycle, this loop of like, I did it again.
Yeah.
I can't control myself, can't stop myself.
Yeah.
Right.
And you can still say those same words, but in a different tone of voice. One is judgmental and punishing, and the other is supportive. It's like,
Can you give me an example of that? Like, how would you phrase that?
Kind of like, you can be like, oh, fuck, you did it again. Yeah, fuck, you know? Or, did it again, didn't you? There you go again. Like, it's, if it's just audio and you can't see my facial expressions, maybe that doesn't make sense. But for me with drugs, it was just either like, oh, you fucking addict, you did it again. Or it'd be like, yeah, man, you did it again. Like, and that's really hard, isn't it? You didn't want to do this, did you? But you did. But that's like, you don't even have to say that it's okay. It's just sort of the tone of voice. Like, I mean, the classic example is how you would talk to a friend in the same situation. It's like, there's just a gentle tone of voice that recognizes that you did it again, recognizes that you failed. I put that in air quotes because you didn't do the thing you wanted to do and you didn't get the result that you wanted. But that's fine. And the process of transformation, the process of reaching a goal, the process of creating something, the process of climbing a mountain involves failure all the time.
I've worked in a lot of tech companies, and some tech companies really embrace failure. Actually, Google, for the longest time, their whole motto is fail fast, fail forward. We can't learn without failing. Yeah. There has to be failure. That is part of the process, right? But I guess my question to you is, if we are kind to ourselves and we are phrasing, we're talking to ourselves in a kind way, how do we get back on track? How would you talk to yourself? It's like, okay, how would you reboot at that point?
Well, when I'm immediately in the moment of something, say I've like just been doing drugs all night and I've run out and now it's time to be going through the come down, I can only kind of relate to my personal thing here, but it's like, I'm not trying to solve the problem in that moment. Right now, what is needed is care, focusing on my breath, not going into problem solving mode. So I'm just laying there. Maybe I have my hands on my chest and just going, this happened. It's okay. I know that sounds really simple, but like,
That's all it really just comes down to, though.
yeah.
Just, you're in it. It is what it is. That's it.
Yeah, I'm in it. This is suffering. This is pain. This is loneliness. Whatever it is you're recognizing, recognize it. I think, again, it's like that resistance thing, right? Like the resistance to loneliness causes more loneliness. But if you're like, okay, loneliness, come on in here, buddy. This is what it feels like.
Because no one thinks they're ever going to feel that way. No one wants to have that emotion of loneliness. No one wants to admit that they are lonely right now.
And lonely feels wrong.
Right.
Therefore, I'm wrong because I have loneliness.
Yeah.
But you're not wrong because you have loneliness. You're human because you have loneliness. And the fact that you feel lonely means that you yearn for connection, which is beautiful, right? So there's kind of this turnaround. Like if you are lonely, it means that you want connection. Wanting connection is a really good thing. So you can
human
look at
thing,
that
too.
part of you and be like, oh, so I was going to say, to answer your question, you can kind of bring it back to values. What do I value? Well, I value connection. Oh, well, that's actually really a wonderful, special thing about me, that I value connection. So now now your loneliness has just shown you a good quality about yourself.
It's the complete perspective switch. Complete
Yeah.
inverse.
And so instead of I'm at fault, it's, oh, I just recognized something that is like makes me good. Like it's sort of a gratitude thing, I guess, or a what's the affirmation?
Right.
Everything, I like to think that all those hard things are also trying to show me the thing about myself that, and so, yeah, in the moment, I just go straight into self-care mode, which isn't much. It's just kind of laying there breathing. And then once the nervous system calms down, it's kind of time for the reflection. And I think it's hard to be aware, like until you're aware what judgment sounds like or looks like. We all have the inner voice in our head, right? Like you're walking through life and you have this narrator that's just telling you how it is all the time. What you like, what you don't like, what they did, what they didn't, And it feels like it's you. It's a part of you, but I don't necessarily think it is you. I think the you is the thing that's hearing it or knows it's talking. But knowing the difference between it talking and it being you and being the listener of being like, oh, there's a voice talking to me is night and day. It's so when this voice says something to myself, Harvey, you're a failure, whatever it is, I don't see that as truth. I note it as, oh, that's judgment. That's the voice that something said to me. I don't personify it as me. That's a meditation thing.
One thing I want to get into, man, and this is something that definitely needs to be talked about is, and I don't know how comfortable you are talking about this, but just sitting here talking to you, man, for the past, hour and 15 minutes, I sense a lot of joy and full of life within you, man. And it's almost impossible for me to think that at one point you didn't want to be here anymore. You didn't want to be alive. And I just want to know what was going on at that time that made you think that this is the only way out. Like this is last resort. I can't see myself getting out. It's like, what were you? Because I've talked to my therapist about it. I've asked him about suicide. I've never been in that state, but he mentioned to me that, and you can tell me your perspective on this, but he mentioned that when people are in that mind state of suicide and killing, they're running away from something. They're running away from the pain.
I think the initial on the surface thought was the only way for me to be sober is to be dead. My life is not good when there's substances in it. It's pure suffering. Well, at the time it was. And I can't live without being on substances. I can't live being on substances equals, well, dead, no substances, no addiction, no life. That was kind of the surface thought, right? But what was going on in my head, again, like for me personally, the only thing that made me want to kill myself was my thinking. It wasn't my circumstance. It was my thinking towards the circumstance. It was my thinking that it was all wrong. It was my thinking that it would never end. It was my thinking that I didn't have any value. It was my thinking that I couldn't do it. And all of that thinking felt real. And it felt real because that was how the circumstances felt in a way. But it was a very narrow view of what it actually was. It was only what my limited thinking could comprehend to the situation at the time.
The equation you made.
Yeah.
If I don't want to be on drugs, I need to be dead. That's the conclusion that you came to.
Yeah. Or just, yeah. And so we can see now that was a product of my mind, not a product of my circumstances. Look how beautiful things turned out, even after they got worse. Be careful what you think. The thinking is, everything we've ever created, beautiful and not, has been a product of our brain. So we have this incredible instrument that's capable of doing wonderful things, acts of kindness, and environmental initiatives, you name it. And it's also capable of war. It's capable of abuse. It's capable of lying. It's capable of... But all of those acts, like for anything to become acted out on, it still has to be kind of thought of. And thoughts are... I'm kind of going maybe too cosmic here.
No, dude,
but
go for it.
We're not in control of what we think. You can't, what's your next thought going to be? You have no fucking idea, do you? It's just going to come. Maybe a door will slam outside and you'll think, oh, a door slams, and that's your next thought. But there was no way to tell that was going to happen. We can kind of tell, I'm going to go and do this thing and I'm probably going to feel. So you can sort of predict stuff, but when it really comes to it, there are these things that are popping up without any control. You don't know where they are when they're not there. And when they are there and then they go away, you don't know where the hell they went. They're this really ethereal thing that feel quite real when we're thinking them. And then when we're not, they're not. So you know what I'm saying?
Mm.
But the identification with them being us, and them being, and some thoughts are really convincing. And maybe even true. I'm not saying thoughts don't mean anything, because just as I said, we need them. They're used to interact with the world and save it and create inventions and stuff we need.
Right.
And make decisions. When you're climbing, I need to think. But yeah, some ideas are really convincing that are just... And at the time of killing myself, my judgment of what the situation was what made me want to kill myself. It wasn't the situation. And of course, at the time, I wasn't capable of judging it any differently because I was in a crisis. So yeah, of course I wasn't just well, maybe this is going to make my life better and I'm going to go to rehab, make a movie and become, Of course I didn't think that in the moment. So in that moment, there was nothing I could do. I couldn't think about it differently. So I understand people that are struggling with depression, with suicide, with these hard things. You can't just tell them to think differently. Wouldn't that just be the...
Doesn't work.
Doesn't work,
yeah.
right?
I've had so many times, there'd be moments in my life where, there was something that was really bothering me, and something I was struggling with, and friends and family were just like, "Oh, suck it up. Just don't think about it anymore."
Yeah.
Like, it's not a light switch.
No.
You can't just flick it on and off. It doesn't work that way for a lot of people. And that's not particularly helpful either. And it's tough because, a lot of, friends and family, they're not trying to be malicious on purpose, right?
No.
But their approach inadvertently can be, because they don't understand, right? Because they don't have those thoughts at that moment. They're not struggling with that. Maybe this is something you can help me with, but I've got a friend of mine who a lot older than me, and he's not struggling with addiction, but he's seriously thought about suicide. I had a phone call with him a few months ago. He had a stroke 2 years ago, and the doctors expected him to make a full recovery, but he's incredibly frustrated at his recovery progress. Because I guess he initially was overly optimistic. He thought, oh yeah, 12 months I'm going to be back at work. And his job requires a lot of physical labor. And so we're now 2 years into it, and the doctor said, well, you need at least another year.
Yeah.
And by the time he's potentially ready to come back to work, he's probably going to be 61 or 62. And he told me, who's going to want to retrain a 61-year-old? What else am I supposed to do? This is what I know. This is what I'm good at. I'm not going to be able to do this job. And he told me he started doing research about, well, how many pills and what kind of pills it would take, because he's just sitting at home wasting away. He's on so much medication, so many blood thinners. He has no energy, can't do anything for more than about 10 minutes, without getting tired. He's a musician. He loves to play guitar. He has no feeling in his left hand. He can't feel the frets. The one thing he loves to do, playing an instrument, and he can't. He has no feeling. I can't imagine what he's going through. I can empathize, but I just can't imagine being boxed in like that.
He's going through an incredible level of grief that can't be solved, at least by one of us or in the moment.
And he has no family here. That's the thing. His whole family is out of province, and they don't have room to take him in. And I just feel really bad for him, and I don't know how to help him other than just trying to spend time with him and being a friend.
That's it. And what you said about your parents saying, well, hey, don't worry about it, or maybe I don't remember the choice of words. That's because humans are problem solvers. We want to make things better for people. We want to get rid of bad things. And we're uncomfortable with discomfort and pain. We don't want to witness it. We don't want to see it. Not because, we don't like it, but I think it's mostly because we don't like to see other people suffer. But someone else being in a state of anxiety, panic attack, grief, we want them to not be in that state. So we're trying to figure out something to do to make it go away. And you can't. And it's uncomfortable for us, and it's uncomfortable for obviously the person going through it. And I use the word uncomfortable. It's in a big way. But we can be there for each other in respect for that level of pain, like for the grief, and meet it with what it is. Not try to make it go away or minimize it. What your friend's going through sounds incredibly difficult would be an understatement. But I think meeting it with that and the kindness and tolerance just for it being what it is. And, him not having, well, who's going to hire me when I'm 62? It's like, well, you're right. Maybe nobody will. But that doesn't mean that's the end of the story. And what we think might be true. Maybe you'll never play guitar again. Maybe you'll never have a job again. But that still isn't the end of the story. And things ending doesn't necessarily mean, you know? And that's what I mean by those thoughts that are really convincing. Yeah. It makes sense. Without my ability to do this, my life is going to be horrible. That's a fair conclusion to draw, but it's not the end of the story.
I guess from his perspective, because he's been doing something for decades, and that's his life, and playing in bands and doing this type of job that he's doing, and then when that stops all of a sudden and everything changes, I guess from his perspective, he doesn't know, like you're saying, it's not the end. It doesn't have to be the end, but what does that new beginning look like?
You don't know. And that's what grief is, right? What is my life going to be like without this person, or without, it's mystery.
You just got to figure it out.
Well, and life is mystery. We don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. Our comfort is all built around knowing. I was saying this talking about climbing earlier. You kind of know the ropes, you know the systems, you know the route. You're not as scared. But like we don't know. Yeah. And that's scary, especially when we experience loss, not just loss of another close one or loved one, but like loss, loss of your health, loss of your, all kinds of loss we experience throughout our lives. And not knowing what things are going to be like without that thing is one of the scariest and most unsettling places to be as a human. And so it's to recognize that that's what it is. It's a scary place to be as a human. And so all of the thoughts that you're having about it are because you're in that place that's the most difficult to be a human. Does that make sense? So it kind of
absolutely,
it kind of makes it brings it into perspective and saying like, oh, I'm actually in this spot that is, I don't want to say a rite of passage, but like a place, it's the most difficult place for a human to be a human because of the loss, because of the confusion, because of the not knowing about what the future. And that's why I feel this way. I don't feel this way because of the event. I feel this way because of the existential stuff that it arises in me.
When someone tells me, oh, it's I'm too old to change, I'm too old to learn, I just feel that's a cop-out, because I feel like we're all capable, if we want to, we're all capable of learning new things. I mean, I've spent over the last 3 years during COVID, not necessarily reinventing myself, but learning skills that I never had before. And why does a certain number, when we turn X old, that you can't do that?
Well, it's not.
That's that limitation that we're imposing on ourselves. Maybe that's society. That's society. That's society saying that you can't. But that's completely a fabrication. That's just a concept. Like why can't you do something else?
Yeah, it's an idea. It's a thought. It's something that people hear, say. And somehow, because it maybe makes sense in a sort of way, there's something, this is what I mean about the convincing nature of things, right? Like, it seems kind of plausible. Oh yeah, when I'm old, I'm not going to be as good at. Sort of some evidence-based, but not really true.
Right. And even if it is completely true, being okay with it being completely true.
Yeah.
Like,
because it doesn't have to be another way.
Right, exactly. Like, for example, your friend Alex, what you were saying as well, Harvey. Yeah, he might not get trained or get another job at 62. It's okay. It is what it is. Yeah. Right? Like, and something you alluded to in the documentary, you're much more than a rock climber. You're a singer, right? You do different things. Mm-hmm. And giving yourself up to something external is, you're prone to be let down in a way, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Right? Like, for example, when COVID happened, they closed all the mountains, all the
that I didn't understand. I don't understand that.
Yeah, that makes I don't even want to talk. I don't want to get into that. But when that happened, you lost your sense of identity, and that can't happen. You have to be okay with the world. Just, you have to be. It's almost like you have to make it completely, unrealistic. Where if the world blew up, if everything that we known to man in history went to shreds, and I'm the only person just standing here on Earth, I will be fine because I am.
Exactly. And I mean, I don't know if I said this before we started recording, but when I tried to kill myself, it was 3 months after the best summer of my life. You see it in the film. I got to the top of the mountain. Yay. I was like, I did it. I've arrived. I've crushed my goal. I'm sober. All of these great things. And it was like, I was under the illusion a little bit that, like, as we all are, well, hey, if I get this, if I do this, if I'm this, then I'll be okay. Right? And you will be for a little bit. Like, it's not about not accomplishing goals or sort of striving for things, but thinking that that thing is going to answer the predicament that we're all in for the time that we're alive. It's hard to realize that that's not how it works.
It'll fizzle out, and it's not sustainable in any way.
And this is the nature of impermanence. I think it's all really easy for us to agree that everything's impermanent and doesn't last forever. We can sort of agree on that on a cognitive level. Yeah, duh. But really understanding what that means in life and on a daily basis is that nothing, like, everything is changing, everything is coming and going, everything is arising and disappearing. There is no solid ground to stand on. If you get to the top of the mountain, you gotta go down the mountain and then go to work. Doesn't matter. Like, it matters, but you know? And so
I think also there's a really, there's a positive message in what you're saying too about, you know, you're saying life is finite too, and all the more reason to just
be kind.
Be kind, and also find out what drives you, what you're interested in, and just go and do that. Do something, explore. Like you're saying, life is a mystery, and that's the beautiful thing about, there's so much we don't know, and we're taking it day by day, and just, you know, just find something interesting and just go and do it.
Don't tie yourself so into it,
right,
for when, if it ever does come to an end, that you're left there thinking, what's the point of living?
Well, I think,
like, for example, for me in this podcast, I'm really engulfed in it now. I'm very dedicated. I've invested a lot of time in it. It's part of my identity. If one day tomorrow the world just completely wipes out every podcast platform in the world, all the clips come off of all the social media, what I'm supposed to just say, oh, there's no point of living anymore? Right? Like when I first...
Don't worry, I'm building the podcast bunker right now.
I mean, it's like you might go through a state of grief. I think it's recognizing grief though, right? Like that kind of makes it make more sense, and grief does eventually pass. So instead of stopping it at, well, I don't have this thing anymore, so there's no reason to live, it's like, I don't have this thing anymore, so I'm experiencing grief. And grief is something that humans experience. And maybe I can go through this grief and keep living. Right?
Absolutely. And I think, you know, what you were saying about my friend who was thought about killing himself too, and he was obviously experiencing a form of grief too. And I think because he's tied in, Mo, going back to what you're saying, he's tied up so much of what he does. Like his work is really part of his identity. He's so wrapped up in it. And not everyone treats it that way, but that also made him really good at what he did. And he had a reputation. And then when that came crumbling like down and that was taken away from him, he felt powerless. It's part of your identity, but it isn't your entire identity, right? It doesn't have to be.
That's how I felt about sobriety and about climbing. When I first got sober in 2015 and had that 4-year period of renaissance, I call it, it was like, I'm sober, I'm climbing. I had a huge identity wrapped up in being the sober guy, in being a climber. I'm a hairdresser too, and I talk about it with all my clients, and I was like, I fit into this identity of these things, which I really liked, and they were good things. People liked them too. They wanted to know about them. They wanted to talk about them with me. It was like, I found Harvey. And so when relapse happened, when COVID happened, all those things were kind of taken away. It was like, especially the sobriety thing. Like there was, when I started relapsing in 2019, I couldn't tell anybody about it because I'd been sober for 4 years, and it was like really hard to just like break the news to your best friend or your girlfriend, like, hey, you know, I've been going for beers by myself on the beach and not telling anybody about it. Like that's shame, right?
Just ashamed of it, yeah.
And because I couldn't tell people about it, I had to do it in secret. And what is the best food for shame? Secret. And this was all because of the loss of identity that I had as the right kind of Harvey.
This hairdresser, rock climber, singer, all these things tied up into one, yeah.
And when I shifted out of that, it was like unlovable because I'm not clean anymore. Even the word clean assumes I was dirty before, but I'm not sober anymore. I'm not climbing anymore. I'm not somebody's partner anymore. I'm not somebody's friend anymore. I'm not cutting people's hair. All of these things, right? And bringing it full circle to love, you know, we talk about this concept, unconditional love, and we learn love on a conditional basis from day one. Not maliciously or meant to exclude, but, you know, like your parents, your teachers in elementary school, you're rewarded for doing something that's good, and you're somewhat punished, you know, in a small or big way for doing something that's bad. In other terms, you're praised and loved for doing the right thing, and there's a little bit of love that's retracted when you do the wrong thing. And that's exactly how we treat ourselves. I love myself when I'm climbing, when I'm sober, when I'm doing all these awesome things that are lovable that everybody else loves. And when I'm smoking crack alone in my apartment and I'm binge eating and I'm gaining weight and I'm all these other things that aren't as nice, my own self-love is taken away because I've decided that that's not lovable. What's lovable is this, Harvey. What's unlovable is this, Harvey. And the whole thing has to just been like, Harvey's a human that has both sides, and he deserves love no matter what, especially from my own self. So maybe in closing, to kind of say, it's like to my own self-love isn't dependent on my level of success. It's inherent in just me being alive. I want to treat other humans that way. Like, and it's hard to do. Like, it's hard to be loving towards someone when they're upsetting you. Or not doing what you think they
really
should do.
Pissing you off.
Yeah. And that's where the practice on oneself comes into play, right? Because sure, you can love someone else when they're going through a hard time and you're in the mood for compassion. Compassion's easy to give when you're in the mood for it, and it's kind of like, oh, they're having a hard time, I can do this. But can you be compassionate to someone when they're really pissing you off? And it's like, can you be compassionate to yourself when you're really pissing yourself off? You learn it little ways, and that's kind of that tone of voice that you talk to yourself in. When you do something wrong, it's kind of like, oh, I didn't want to let myself do that, but I did it. And you don't even have to say it's okay. You can just recognize that that's what happened and not add judgment to it. Or even add the judgment that it's okay. It's like, oh, this happened again. Okay.
Right. And everything you just said is just so much easier said than done. It's a practice.
Yes.
It's a full-on mental, physical, even just practice every single day, every single moment, every second.
Yeah.
Just for, people listening and really going through something, man. I mean, what's the one thing you would tell them? What's the one thing that you would say? There's a million things, but
that you're absolutely valuable and lovable and worth living for, fighting for, regardless of what someone's done to you, regardless of what you've done to yourself, regardless of, that you're beautiful. And yeah, I like that we don't know what the end of the story is going to be, and I think that, yeah, I would tell someone those things.
Well said.
Our suffering isn't the end of the story. It's really hard because when we're in pain, it doesn't feel like that pain is going to end. It's hard to, when you're experiencing pain, it's hard to imagine what things feel like without that pain, right? And then it's kind of funny too, like when you're happy, on the other side, when you're really experiencing, it's kind of really hard to remember what pain really feels like. I've broken so many bones in my body, and in the moment where that physical sensation is there and you're like in agony, it's such a powerful thing because you're like engulfed by it. But when it's not there anymore, it's hard to conjure up and really bring that feeling and intensity of it into your then current experience. And so it's kind of, it's hard going through that, but it's not the end. And I think as humans, as ourselves, we need to value, this is very hard to do, but we need to value our pain a little bit more, right? Give it what it deserves. It deserves to be there in a way. And like I said in the beginning, what it's asking of us isn't it to be told to go away. It's asking to be invited in and loved.
There's a good in it, no matter how, not good, but there is a beauty in it somewhere.
Yeah. And I mean, I don't even know if we need to color it with those words, because I guess with there is, yes. But even like, because when you're in that moment of pain, thinking like, well, maybe this pain will be beautiful one day, or it's beautiful, is, you're gonna, it's kind of like
maybe just your being.
Yeah. But it's okay. It's allowed to be there. And what it needs, let's just take it out of a personal level. What does the pain of the world need? It needs our love. It needs our kindness, not our fucking intelligence to make it go away somehow.
All right, so let's plug your documentary. So your documentary is called Crux. I can see that it actually has won quite a lot of accolades. So for those that haven't seen it, please do watch it. You can find it on Vimeo. You can rent and purchase it there. Are there any other platforms that people should go?
I believe there's one called Real House. If you're in France, you can watch it on Amazon Prime. I think it's on American Prime too. Some reason we don't have it in Canada. I hope it is going to be available on YouTube and sort of free to view soon. Something to do with licensing, and I'm not a part of that stuff. So
yeah. It was kind of weird. We're trying to find it on where was it, Prime, and it was just the UK, US, and France.
If you want to watch it and you are of limited means, or for whatever reason, just hit me a DM at Harvey, and I'll send you a free link for it.
Man, this has been amazing, and I just want to thank you for being so vulnerable and telling us your story. And I'm very grateful and appreciative that you're here, man, talking about it. And honestly, dude, you're such a superstar, and your whole presence and your whole energy, because I'm a big energy guy, it's all so pure. And the world needs more people like you to be vulnerable and be this accepting and pure, not just with themselves, but everyone else around them. And I just want to thank you, dude. This means a lot. I told Alex, like, before you came in, like, I'm truly, like, I haven't been nervous in a while about an episode, but this was, I really wanted to make it how it is and really get the message out there and, you know, make you feel comfortable with which you are, because you're, you know, you wear your heart on your sleeve, man. And thank you again, dude.
Vulnerability's cool, man.
It's cool.
Right? Like,
it's the wave, man. It really is.
I really appreciate that. I had a great time.
Absolutely,
I
dude.
feel like you asked that initial question. I think it was just kind of my background and story, and I didn't even answer it. Just started talking about love right away.
Oh, dude. Perfect. I mean,
Yeah.
it's one of those things I'm going to listen to for my own meditative and just for my own value. I'm just going to keep listening to this. I feel really
some of the some of the resources I use. I listen to a guy named Jack Cornfield. He's got a podcast on Be Here Now Network. You can watch it on YouTube or on your phone on podcasts. Incredible. I've probably been listening to him talk about an hour a day for the last 5 years of my life, and it has changed. Like, the way that I speak and think is a product of hearing others sort of say the same thing, or at least teach the same kind of concepts.
Dude, I was going to say, you should start a podcast. You should start a YouTube and talk. How good would he be, man? Honestly.
Harvey's Heart Corner.
Dude, I am not lying to you. You would be pretty well known. I'll tell you.
Don't forget to listen to Ponytails.
Here you go. Appreciate you, man.
Thank you for that.
Thank you.
Alrighty.
Enjoy your 24, episode 42. If you liked anything from this episode, which I really hope you did, because there's literally no way you couldn't have, but please like, subscribe, share it with your friends. If you are going through something, man, please talk to somebody. Okay, you are not alone. Okay, you are loved, you are wanted, you are valued, and I'm very happy for the people that are going to listen to this episode, for having us part of your day and really supporting. So thank you for everyone. Enjoy your 24, episode 42 with Harvey Wright, man. Thank you, dude.
And last thing, where can people find your music?
Spotify, Apple Music, YouTube.
What's the name of the band?
Band's called Ponytails.
There we go.
Ponytails Band.
Right now. Do it right now.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Thank you, everybody. So glad to come here and speak. And I hope you're all well out there. I love you.
Peace and love. Thanks. Peace.